Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Play, Pause, Rewind. It is our 97th episode, going on many years of doing this, and we're back. Niles, how have you been the last couple weeks since our last recording session?
You know, it's been a weird, weird few weeks. Had a bizarre health episode playing mini golf, which is always fun. That was my first time riding an ER, or not an ER, in an ambulance, going to the ER, which was a fun experience. But I don't.
Mini golf is dangerous. It's
yeah, that's what
gotta
I've
be
heard.
careful out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's more dangerous than actual golf. And it's 10 times more dangerous than American football. So be careful.
You really need to master regular golf before you move on to mini golf. It's a lot easier to get stuck.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Otherwise, it's been a good few weeks since our last episode. How about you, Dylan? How have you been?
Oh, pretty good. Busy. It's Q4 in the business world, and we work, have jobs, so. Everything's kind of going crazy as usual. But, speaking of business, I guess, do you want to tell us about our film for this week?
Yes, I do. So this week we're talking about The Apprentice. The Apprentice is a biopic of the young Donald Trump in New York City in the 1970s and 80s. The film examines his father-son-like relationship with the cutthroat lawyer Roy Cohn as he takes Trump under his wing to teach him all that he knows. And it just goes from there. It gets weird. But it stars Sebastian Stan, Jeremy Strong, Maria Bakalova, and it was directed by Alia Bassi. I think I'm pronouncing that right, I hope. And it was written by Gabrielle Sherman. Now, as we dive in here, if you're new to the podcast, fair warning, we are a little left-leaning here. We're a little more progressive, but I don't think that we're going to try to dive into politics too much in this episode, especially since the election is weeks away. And everyone is getting bombarded with political ads. I know I'm sick of them. I'm sure everyone else is. So I don't really want to try or talk too much about politics.
Okay.
But we'll see how that goes.
I will make no such promises, but I will do my best. I will say, it is inevitable, at least somewhat. Yes. We're talking about Donald Trump. He is a former president of the country where we live, and there is a much too high percentage chance that he will once again become the president of the country where we live.
Yes.
And he's not a good guy. If you were wondering where we stood on this, he's a really bad person, through and through.
100%.
I think, and we will talk about it later. And I want to talk about some comments Sebastian Stan made about this, but it's one thing I do appreciate about this movie is that it treats him like a human being, not in the sense that it tries to make us feel bad for him or like him, but it showcases that, and this is important, and we'll talk about it later, but even the worst people on earth are still people, and they are not as unique as we would like to think they are.
Yes, but absolutely. Well, yeah, I totally agree. I think he's sleazy, he's a liar, he's a scumbag, he's a threat to democracy, he's a rapist, and he's a terrible guy. But no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, all are welcome on this podcast, and we're happy to have you here to listen to our discussion on The Apprentice. Dylan, what are your initial thoughts on The Apprentice?
I thought this was a really interesting movie, and I enjoyed watching it a lot, actually. I wasn't, I didn't really have many thoughts about it at all, other than, I had seen one production still or promotional still from it for, a year and a half, and I knew it was coming out, and I remember thinking, Sebastian Stan's a pretty good-looking guy. Why the fuck did they cast him to play Donald Trump? But I will say the film was really bolstered by pretty consistently strong performances and centered around the performances of Sebastian Stan and Jeremy Strong. And I think Stan made a very, very smart acting choice here by not attempting to do the Donald Trump voice that we all know. And I wouldn't say love, but we appreciate it for its character. But he focuses more on the mannerisms and delivery of Donald Trump, which I think he really nails, like almost perfectly. He really is able to embody the energy of this guy. But the film centers primarily on the relationships between Trump and his mentor, Roy Cohn, and Trump's first wife, Ivana. And I think both of these relationships are realized very well. And they're illuminating both about who Trump is as a person, as well as the nature of our modern political landscape. I also thought the camera work was really interesting throughout. It was very much like, it felt like an observational documentary almost, just like, not like someone was even officially documenting all of these scenes, but that they just happened to always be in the room and were catching this happening. The camera moved around in very interesting ways. But what about you? What are some of your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up the camera work because I completely forgot to write anything down on that. I remember enjoying the camera work as well. But yeah, I'm glad that I watched this movie as well. It wasn't exactly a movie that I was looking forward to watching because, you know, I despise this man. But I learned several new things about Trump and Roy Cohn in this movie. And I think even just for that, it's worth watching. You know, I already knew that Trump came from a wealthy family and that he's, you know, had a series of successfully failed businesses and that he's a con man. It's like there's a lot that I already know about him, but it's kind of just added more layers to him. And it was just neat to learn new things about his background, about this mentor-mentee relationship that he shared with Cohen. And just kind of like seeing him develop as like take on this personality that we know him to be today. Like he didn't start like that, like you were just saying. Like people don't just come into the world as a villain or as a hero or anything like that. People grow and they change and they adopt mannerisms from other people. They learn lessons and they grow. So he is kind of an amalgamation of all his lessons, of all of his best mistakes in a way.
I love the phrase you just used though, successfully failed businesses, because it really does speak to the con of his whole deal, right? Like he has been bankrupt so many times. A sizable chunk of this movie talks about his casino ventures in Atlantic City. Trump very famously bankrupted a casino, which is something like that you shouldn't really be able to do.
That's an achievement. Yeah.
It is successful failure, you know, like that is, but it's about image making and we'll talk about that in spoilers, but a lot of that had to do with his relationship with Roy Cohn and, structurally, like at its core, this is kind of a, you know, weird to say, but like a master and apprentice story. The Apprentice, appropriate, but it's like, and you sort of see the creation of this monster that we have to deal with today. But it's more interesting than that, I think, as well.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And I think the film, it is definitely critical of Trump. When you leave the theater, you don't have a good taste in your mouth. But there are moments, I think, in this film where it humanizes him a little bit, and at least and the people in his life, like when his brother dies, it is
I
kind
guess it's a story. It's history, not really.
It is history. It's not too much of a spoiler.
Yeah.
But sorry if that is a spoiler. But yeah, his brother dies at a certain point, and I don't know, that I feel like that did humanize him a little bit, and it was like, okay, wow, that is a heavy thing to deal with. But then you got to see how he dealt with it. And then there's all these other moments that overshadow these, that overshadow the good, this humanity, and like all these other shitty actions that he does. I'm not going to get into all of them exactly, but there's so many things, and I do not feel an ounce of empathy for this man. But I think that those humanizing moments were important for this story, because it kind of brought everything back down to earth for a second. It reminded us that, yeah, he wasn't always this person that we know today. He was created over time from multiple influences, lots of decisions, and things like that.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting too, because I also, like, in moments like that in the film, you do feel for him because you're seeing like a human being in mourning for someone that it seemed like there was some care for at some point in his life, right? But what I found interesting as you were just talking is in the past, when an American political figure has an assassination attempt on their life, usually that leads to like a surge in polling and their popularity. And that did not happen for Donald Trump. 2 people have tried to kill him in this election cycle, and people kind of didn't give a shit.
Oh yeah,
which
they
is
really didn't.
fascinating because it is somewhat unique in the history of like our politics that is the case. He is so reviled by the general populace at this point. Like, he has his supporters, of course, his diehards. But yeah, it's like, it is interesting that we feel more empathy for this man as a fictional character in this moment while still finding him revolting than I think any of us can for the real guy that we're still dealing with.
Right. Yeah. Well, and speaking of revolting, I think Roy Cohn's, like, how Jeremy Strong embodied that character in this movie, he did such a phenomenal job. Like, if you go and look up videos of Roy Cohn speaking, like, it is like he knocked it out of the park. He got the impression down so well. It's amazing. But at the same time, I will always see Kendall Roy when I see Jeremy Strong. I just cannot dissociate him from that character. So it's just like, every time I saw him, I'm like, is that Kendall Roy or is that Roy Cohn? I couldn't. I had to remind myself for a second sometimes in the movie.
Both Roys.
Yeah, 2 Roys, 2 very powerful Roys. One is far more competent than the other. And, I would also say that I would recommend this movie to just about everyone, regardless of where you are on this political spectrum. Like, I know that most MAGA supporters, most of his supporters, they're not going to see this movie. They just don't want to. He doesn't want them to, so they're probably not going to see it. And that's okay. But I'd encourage them to do so because if you love Trump so much, then you should take an effort to learn more about him. And whether you love or hate him, Trump is kind of ubiquitous within modern American culture right now, and he carries so much influence over a large part of the population that it's like, I think for that reason alone, you should watch this movie to get a better sense of who he is,
Yeah. And I'm sure like Trump supporters would call this movie liberal propaganda or something like that. But it's like, well, I mean, guys, some of the specific things we see in this film may not be fully, provable, but there is nothing Trump does on screen that he has not bragged about doing himself. And I would say, I forget where this quote originally comes from, but it's like, when someone tells you who they are, listen. He's told you who he is. He's told us all who he is for decades. We know exactly who this fucking guy is, We don't need to speculate, and the film is not bringing anything like to light necessarily. I think it is just painting. I think it paints a very accurate picture of this person, and it does so without othering him and treating him like he is some strange anomaly. He is a human being, and he exists this way because of the environment he chose to exist in, and the choices he made, and just the way he thinks about the world. But I think let's open it up to a broader discussion now, and just jump into spoilers if you're cool with that.
Yeah, let's
do it. All right, let's talk about the backlash first.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. Because, right after this film premiered at Cannes, whatever, that film festival, it premiered
Cannes,
there.
I think.
Yeah, Cannes, whatever. It premiered there, and it was literally the evening of or the next day they sent, or Trump's campaign, they sent a cease and desist letter. They released a statement that was like, this movie, it's all lies. We're going to sue. It's going to be the best lawsuit in the world. And, that was to be expected, to be honest, when this movie, like, because I read a lot about like how this director, he was really debating in his head for a while, like, when is the right time to release this movie? Is it like before the election or after the election? It's like, it has to come before. He really does, because when it comes after, no one really cares anymore at that point. But yeah, this was kind of expected, and it's for Trump's team to be attacking them because it's just life imitating art. Number one lesson: attack, attack, attack. Deny everything, claim victory always. And that's kind of what they've been doing when this came out. And I know that there's been some more back and forth as well from this movie, but there was an article published on the BBC today where Sebastian Stan had a good quote that reads, "I think Trump should be grateful, to be honest. We have pretty much handed him, I think, a very complex three-dimensional take on his life. And I can't recall anybody else doing that." And I love that quote. I'm so happy he said that.
Me too. And I think go for it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was just going to say that I think if Trump's team ever made a biopic about Donald, it would be so one-sided, so two-dimensional, so full of lies.
Oh yeah.
This is probably the most honest representation, most three-dimensional representation of him.
Well, and I think even from the liberal side too, not the and the progressives as well, which is what we are. But I think, and we're seeing it so much in real life politics now. It's like the liberal side of the political spectrum and the more liberal side of the news media, they want to paint Trump as a supervillain, as a uniquely bad individual who must be beaten at all costs, to the point where Kamala Harris is courting endorsements from Dick Cheney.
Wow.
No. Dick Cheney, I'm sorry, maybe this is controversial, but Dick Cheney is worse than Donald Trump. Did we forget what he did? Did we forget the devastation and death that man reigned across the entire fucking world? Like, Trump is not uniquely evil amongst the Republican Party. The Republicans still want to do all of the shit that they've always wanted to do. Trump is just more rude about it. And so a purely capital L liberal take on Trump would just be, I don't know, it would just be fucking Alec Baldwin on SNL, which is not interesting either. It's funny in that context, but the Stan is correct. This is a very, it takes Trump as a human being and explores his psyche, I think. It doesn't paint him kindly, but that's because there is not a kind picture to paint of Trump.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I've thought about this a lot too after watching the movie, is like, if Trump never even tried to go into politics, like, would the Republican Party be that much different? Like, I feel like they would have found a similar kind of talking head to kind of become the party champion, the leader, and propel them forward. I don't know who that would have been at this point. It's difficult to say because it's all hypothetical, but like, I think Trump just kind of gave the Republican Party more free reign to say what they have been kind of hiding for so long.
Yeah, he accelerated their plan basically. And I remember, like, in the 2016 campaign, especially in the primary, like you'll remember that so many of the Republicans were like, "Oh, he's awful, he's disgusting, like I want nothing to do with him." And then they all fell in line when he won. Yep. JD Vance called him like America's Hitler, and now he's the VP candidate. So like, they don't disagree with him. And yes, he did try to overturn the 2020 election, and he will do the same for the 2024 election. So that, I guess, he is somewhat unique in doing, although the Bush campaign did the did a similar fucking thing and got away with it in the 2000s, but whatever, I guess.
we don't talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's like I going back to the thing I said earlier, it's like all the liberals are like, George W. Bush, your silence is screaming at me. Why haven't you endorsed Kamala Harris yet? And it's like, guys, what are you doing?
We don't need that endorsement. Yeah.
No, we don't. But it's God. Okay. Yeah. But Trump, you're right. The Republican Party, where would they be without Trump right now? Probably on the same path, maybe just in a slower lane is what I would say.
Yeah. He just kind of gave them an opportunity to be more vocal and outspoken.
Say the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, exactly. And now I feel like it's desensitized so many people to it. And now they're just kind of like, that's just how Trump talks. Like, just take it with a grain of salt, even though everything he says is what he actually believes,
Yeah. He did give the Nazis permission to take their hoods off. Quite literally. They're out and about now. But let's talk about historical accuracy a little bit. This is about historical figures, so let's go through a little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the film was written by a political journalist, Gabrielle Sherman, who covered Trump's 2016 presidential election. He's also a screenwriter who's worked on a handful of projects. So he's got that journalistic background already. And I did a little bit of digging just to understand what he did for research. And from what I can tell, he read everything that he could about Trump, about Roy Cohn, about New York City, primarily in the 1970s and the 1980s when he was writing this. Like, he didn't really look beyond that. But he also interviewed people who knew Donald and who knew Roy during those years. He asked for anecdotes that weren't already in circulation. So it's a mix of historical secondary research and then also this primary research too. So it's nice to see that he did his work here. So there's a lot of events that take place in this scene or in this movie. And we're just going to go through a few here.
Trigger warning for the next one too.
Yes. Thank you.
For a trigger warning for sexual assault. If anybody does not want to listen to that, skip ahead probably 3 or 4 minutes.
So the first question, Dylan, do you think that Trump really raped Ivana?
Well, I don't really want to speculate directly, but like I will just say this: Trump is a rapist. So I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to answer that question directly, just because I don't want to speculate on someone else's sexual assault. But Trump is a rapist. He is, and nothing, as I said earlier, nothing depicted in this movie is stuff we don't know. And Ivana did say during their divorce that she was raped. There were later comments allegedly from her, but delivered via Trump and his team that said she meant more like metaphorically, which I don't know.
Yeah, I think that, because she later disavowed her testimony or her divorce deposition where she talked about the rape. We don't know all the facts there, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, yes, he did rape her, and her depiction in court was far more graphic than what they showed on screen. But I'm very glad that whether or not it happened, that they included this scene in the movie because of Trump's multiple allegations of sexual misconduct, his misogynistic behaviors. That Access Hollywood tape, like, oh my God, that's just ridiculous. And it's such a powerful moment in the film too, because he's literally sexually assaulting his own wife, the mother of his children. That's a brutal fucking low. That's terrible.
Yeah, and it's after a point where he says he's like no longer attracted to her. And didn't he say to someone in real life in the last couple of years that like he wouldn't even rape them because he didn't find them attractive? Isn't that a thing?
Like that.
That's a thing that happened. Yeah. We can keep this topic contained to these few minutes, but like, it's it's an important and true element of his character. Whether or not the details of this specific incident are one-to-one accurate, I don't know. But another element of the history of this film is the Trump real estate company being sued for racial discrimination as the film opens before he meets Roy Cohn. And the first time they work together is getting him out of this is, basically they denied leases to black tenants, right? That was the sort of controversy.
Yeah, so this is a real case and a real investigation from 1972 to 74. These or potential black tenants for the property, they would be marked with C or for colored, on their paperwork, which you can see in real court documents on the FBI website, apparently. So, yes, this happened. This was a real case. And yes, he was sued for this. And yes, he did. From my understanding, he racially discriminated.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, Trump has always been very authentically and openly racist, I feel like. It's been what has been an interesting shift in real life with him, interesting and sad, is just watching the rhetoric from him change as the party he led further right has descended into complete fucking madness. Because Trump ran in 2016, being like relatively open about LGBTQ plus people, and now that's all gone because the Republican Party has moved so far into Nazism that they're not on board with that anymore. They're not on board with all of the social progress we made as a society over the last 25 years, and they want to take it all away. And they want to, kill trans people. But yeah, Trump has always been racist.
Yeah, no, he absolutely is. Another big thing in the film was this big tax abatement deal that he was trying to get for his property that he was trying to build at NYC. And yeah, this was actually something that he did. He got a 40-year tax abatement deal with the NYC, and in 2016, the New York Times reported that the deal had cost the city $360 million in missing taxes, which is ridiculous. And across other tax breaks from his construction of other real estate properties over 40 years, the New York Times also reported that there's been at least $885 million in tax breaks for him that he's gotten, which is so infuriating.
It is, but I want to talk about this scene in the movie a little bit because it really uses the structure of its story to mess with you a little bit, I think, because structurally, in terms of we've all seen movies where and Donald is portrayed a little bit different than these protagonists usually are, but the doughy-eyed young person is taken under the wing of this business magnate or whatever, and sort of rises through the ranks and either destroys themselves or sees the light of day just in time. And structurally in that story, this is Trump's big break. This is when he's going to break onto the scene. And then the next part of the movie is going to be where all the successes are happening and parties and it's a good time. And I caught myself in this scene as this hearing is happening. It's I hope it works out for him. I hope he gets what he's looking for here. And then I'm like, what the fuck am I? What?
What am I saying?
Yeah, but it plays into what we're about to talk about, because it's doing that thing where he's he really wants this. The film has told us up to this point how much he really wants this shit to happen, and so it does allow you to kind of root for him for a second before realizing what you're doing. And I think that is one element of the film that I liked. Yes. You got one more historical thing, and then I want to talk about what I just...
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so after he does these property deals and he buys that casino down at whatever in Atlantic City, and he's really kind of fucking up at a certain point. And he's got some money troubles in the movie. Were these real? As a matter of fact, yes, they were. It's well documented that his choices nearly led to his own financial ruin. Look this up. He's declared bankruptcy half a dozen times in his lifetime. He's really screwed the pooch many times, and we see even in this movie. I couldn't verify how accurate this was, but he goes to his dad, who's obviously like not all there mentally anymore,
right?
And he's like trying to get him to sign this document that would give him access to his siblings' trust funds, basically. And he's like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. It's just like I'm trying to, just move some money around." It's like, no, he's trying to pay off his debts because he fucked up so bad.
Dude, it's like fucking Shia LaBeouf in Megalopolis going to
it is. It's like, come on, Dad, why don't you bail me out?
Yeah, but it and that goes back to what you were talking about with the successful failures and just the cultivation of image, and we'll talk about it more when we talk about Roy Cohn in a little bit. But like, so much of Trump's perceived success is just that, perceived, and because he's been financially bankrupt many times, but because of both image cultivation and the way American society and our economy is structured to always keep the wealthy wealthy and keep everybody else, in their place, quote unquote. He's managed to always find his way back, but through the means of, corruption and stealing other people's money and scamming people and cashing in on his name. And I mean, he's doing it right now with with his fucking Trump digital trading cards, which are just NFTs. Like, he's still scamming people with NFTs in 2024.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like I've seen the video commercials he makes for them, and it really speaks to his identity as a 90s and 2000s TV guy, because the ad reads like an infomercial from that era, and whatever. But
I'm gonna have to look one of those up.
Yeah, it's wild. And you can totally tell like he's been pushed into doing this by Don Jr. and maybe Barron. But yeah. But I want to look at this quote from Sebastian Stan. I pulled this from Deadline, but he was talking to Entertainment Weekly, and he said, "I think that there's a Trump in all of us to some extent. I know that might not be a popular thing to say, or people maybe don't want to admit it. It's important for us to explore perhaps the darker elements that live within all of us, so that by bringing them into the light, we can understand how to have a better relationship with them, rather than suppressing and avoiding and pretending that they're not there. I think that's where the value is, because I don't think anyone is on a moral high ground." And I think there's a lot of truth to what Stan said here, and he also mentioned, I think we said this earlier, but we need to stop treating Trump like he is some space alien, and rather than being a human being. And I say this a lot. Yeah. I think I've said it in this episode too. Like, Trump is not as unique as people like him to be. He's very strange and very dangerous, but putting him in his own category is not useful. Because there will always be another Trump. There will always be another opportunistic person who is able to use their, charisma or whatever it is Trump has. I think he has a sort of unique charisma. I will say that. Yeah. There will always be these people, and you listening to this might even be one of those people. And it's important, when we look at someone like Donald Trump or Roy Cohn, to not see them as an other, to recognize that they are like us to a degree, so that when we see those tendencies in ourselves or in the people around us, we can check them and, learn to not succumb to those base instincts, because all of us can go bad. All of us can do fucked up things. None of us is truly above that unless we work on it. Hey, you know what? Okay. Star Wars. It's like
there we go. It's coming back.
Yep. Yeah. There we go.
We always go back to Star Wars.
Oh, and I'm gonna do it even more, because I'm gonna talk about The Last Jedi specifically.
Okay. There we go.
We're gonna make everybody mad now, but that's why I appreciate Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi, or one reason I appreciate him in The Last Jedi so much is he, in defeating Vader and the Emperor, he made the mistake of thinking he was above all that, even though he almost succumbed to the dark side in his fight with Vader. And in so doing, he forgot to maintain that in him, and he succumbed to the fear again and led to a whole other war and, all that stuff. So, yeah. Okay. That's enough spoilers.
Well, I am glad that you brought up these points, because it's incredibly relevant in today's world, because we can all just stop working on progress, and we can turn a blind eye to the injustices of our society and say, hey, it's not happening to me, so why do I need to care about it? It doesn't necessarily make you worse or better than anybody, but like you're saying, we all need to put our best foot forward and stand up, not just for ourselves and what we believe in, but also for our friends, for our family, and those people that we don't even know, but they're in our community. And it's all about taking that initiative to be the positive change in the world.
Right. And like the people around us and the people of the past are our history, and we learn history. And I mean, it's a depressing subject, but like we don't like there's a reason we study genocides, like the Holocaust, right? We don't just study it and then look at the people who did it and say, well, those were the people of then, not me. I wouldn't do that. Because we study it so that we understand what caused it, what led people to do it, so that we don't do it again or allow it to happen again.
Yeah.
Israel, Palestine. It's like we learn lessons so that we can better ourselves today. And that we're talking about this with Trump on a personal level, but with, there's macro societal level stuff too. And we all have a responsibility to be better, building on the mistakes of the people that came before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you want to talk about Donald Trump as a character?
Yes,
a little bit?
I
Talk
do.
about his character in this movie, because he was one of the most interesting things I'd said before about this film to me was just watching how Donald changed and evolved over time. He gradually picked up these lessons from Roy and Cohn, these ideas, these behaviors and mannerisms, and that shaped him into the personality that we all know today. Like, it is kind of night and day when you first see that first scene of Trump, like out on his date or hanging out with his family, and how he acts and behaves then, or even when he first meets Roy Cohn and he's just kind of like a little bit more reserved, a little bit more well-spoken. And then by the end of the film, he's just like spouting lies. He doesn't care anymore. He'll say whatever he wants. And it is just crazy to see that transformation.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that first scene with him on the date, though, at that club, because it shows what you were just talking about with how he's really molded by Cohen into what he becomes. But it also shows that he was always kind of the type of guy who would become that person, because the entire date, if you think back to it, he's talking to this girl and he's just talking about how, like, hey, I'm the youngest person I've ever let in here. And he's pointing out this guy is super fucking important, and he's going to be great for me and my business, and this guy and this guy and this guy. And the girl is like, why do you care what these people think about you? And it just shows that even though Trump did not have the social capital yet to navigate this space and excel within it, but he was already like thinking how he thinks now, if that makes sense. And another scene that really stood out to me that really nailed who Trump was the moment when Trump Tower is completed and they're having that big party there. And Fred Trump, his dad, is at the party as well. And there's just this fascinating moment between the two of them. Fred Trump, who is also, or was, he's dead, but a notorious piece of shit as well, by the way. This movie does a very interesting thing about making these people who are famous pieces of shit into like almost seeming sympathetic just by putting them next to Donald, who is so much more vile. But
Yeah.
Fred Trump is very clearly trying to have a moment of connection with his son. He's like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Like, this reminds me of that time I did this real estate deal, whatever. And he's just talking about a property he did. And doesn't matter which one. But Trump clearly, like, either can't see this attempt at connection or refuses to engage with it and just chooses to instead put down his father to elevate himself. He's like, oh, no, Dad, this is nothing. This is nothing like what you've done. This is much bigger. This is much more impressive. And it's just, it's sad because it's like, oh, this is a potential for even you, a horrible person, to like have a genuine moment of like kindness with your father, and you were choosing the opposite and just being cruel to elevate yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of a gut punch in a way. If I was having that same conversation with my dad, I'd be like, oh, why did I talk to him that way? You know, I revere my father. And that was a fascinating scene. And one of the other ones, we alluded to it earlier too, I didn't put down any show notes about it, but when Fred Jr. dies, his brother, like, Trump has been quoted as saying like, oh, I kind of wish that I did a little bit more for my brother, or like, I kind of like, you know, he does seem to have some regrets about his older brother's death, but like, the way he responds to it in this movie is like, he doesn't want to show any emotion. He doesn't want to cry. He's like, no, don't even touch me. Don't look at me. I'm just going to sit here and put it out of my mind, and then business as usual. It's like he just has this cognitive block in a way. He can't process this in a healthy manner.
Yeah, I think, well, because it is almost played, at least in the film, like it's his fault. Like, his brother comes to him for help, obviously, and he's just like, oh, just stay in a hotel for the night. It'll be fine. Like, you can come back later. And I thought that was an interesting contrast to their scene earlier in the movie when they're out at the bar together. You know, Freddie, I guess, is like getting too drunk because he's an alcoholic, and Trump sort of cuts him off and is like, all right, it's time to go home. And he takes care of him and gets him out of there. And then that sort of goes away over the course of the movie. The next time they interact, I think, is the wedding scene, and he's just like fucking annoyed with him the entire time because he's making a scene. And then this third time, he comes to him for help, and Trump is just like, get out of here.
You can't stay here, yeah.
Yeah, you can't stay at my... And he... God, fucking Sebastian Stan was great in this scene. Remember, he takes the little toy that his brother brought for the kid, and he just chucks it on the stairs. He's like, and he points to it, and he's like, look, he brought a toy for the kid.
Yeah, it's like this stupid little car. It's like, oh, cool, thanks.
It's for a fucking baby. Like, it's we didn't know that baby was going to turn into Donald Jr. Like, at that point, it was just a kid.
Yeah, exactly. It's disgusting. Yeah, just the way he behaves in that scene. But yeah. You want to talk about someone else who's disgusting?
Yeah, but one more thing too. I think just a real tie-in with Trump is like, Trump does not drink, and he doesn't do drugs, and this is I guess a moment of tension early on with him and Cohen is that Cohen likes to party a lot, and I thought that scene where Trump is basically being forced to drink to enter in this business relationship was kind of interesting, and then also how you see him uncomfortably navigate that party at Cohen's house when he's the only one not on a substance. And also he's probably uncomfortable with the sex stuff, especially the same sex stuff that he sees. But I did kind of feel, I think we've all been in a situation like that where we're in a social situation, especially at a party where we don't really know anybody except like the one or two people we came with, and we can't find them. And we feel uncomfortable in the environment because it's not where we'd normally be. I found that moment surprisingly relatable as well. But
yeah, I get that too. And like also being like the only sober person in like a party when everyone's drinking and stuff. It's like, yeah, that's That's a weird experience.
Yeah, it's not fun. But that does transition us nicely into Roy Cohn as a character. Go for it.
Yeah, so from my understanding, the depiction of Cohen here is incredibly accurate. Like I said earlier, not like Strong gave a powerful performance. He fucking nails the impression. He's really great at it. But then also just like the details around Cohen. Like apparently he was a cutthroat attorney who would do whatever he needed to win. And yeah, even sometimes he'd use illegal tactics in criminal cases. He would boast on national TV that terrible consequences are going to happen for his political rivals, like just very ominous, on the nose things. And like he represented like mob bosses. Like it's just crazy to learn about this man and everything that he's done.
He was also involved in the McCarthy hearings and the prosecution of espionage trial for Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, alleged Soviet spies. And he mentions this in the movie.
Right.
But so Julius was the one suspected of treason and espionage. Ethel was just his wife and wouldn't turn on him. Roy Cohn went above and beyond to make sure they got executed.
Oh my gosh.
Really gave it his all to make sure these people die. And apparently Ethel Rosenberg's, I think this is from Behind the Bastards that I heard this, but like Ethel Rosenberg's execution did not go smoothly, and they electrocuted her so many times that like her head caught on fire or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and Roy Cohn was a fucking monster. And that's important to remember because he is a monster who created a monster that eventually abandoned him. And that does make you feel some sympathy for him in the second half of the movie, but he is very much a man who deserved to die. And he got the fate he deserved. He died painfully, penniless, and alone. And that's good. Based on what I learned about him, he was horrifyingly evil.
Well, yeah, I think like in the movie, like as soon as they meet him, he's just like, yeah, I got like a 33-0 record. Like he just like brags about like how good he is. And wow, yeah, I didn't know that about the Rosenbergs. I remember that line from the movie, but yeah, I didn't realize how terrible that was. Well, yeah, there's this. I found this quote from this interview that the writer of the film did on The Hollywood Reporter that reads, I think there's a deep nihilism at the core of Roy Cohn's personality. I think it can manifest as evil, but I don't think he is evil per se. I think he became evil because he hated himself so much. There's a humanity that is so deep inside Roy that it's hard to see, but I try to find it as a writer. I try to find the humanity even in the monsters. I find part of the reason our culture is so polarized as we stop trying to understand people that we might disagree with. And I like that quote a lot because I think he is totally right on Roy Cohn, because Roy is always attacking. That was his number one rule that he taught to Donald. Attack, attack, attack. And he's always going after what he wanted. But then he's got this secret lifestyle at the same time, because at the time, you couldn't be an openly gay attorney. It just couldn't happen. You couldn't have a successful career. And I feel like, in a way, because of those restrictions, like as a society on like what he could do, he probably hated himself because his lifestyle was clashing with the culture, and he couldn't be who he really wanted to be around everybody, which is kind of a tragedy. But also, fuck this guy.
And some of this is just, I listened to the Behind the Bastards on this guy because I knew nothing about him, and he was he was gay, but he did spend a whole lot of time advocating against gay rights, like very vocally and aggressively, because he thought his wealth and power protected him from the discrimination. He was also Jewish, so from another marginalized background, and apparently that had some, his like uncle or granddad or something was like in part blamed for the 1929 stock market crash because, I don't know, just like a wealthy guy, but he was Jewish, so they fucking blamed him because for whatever reason, like hateful conspiracy people always fucking blame Jewish people for everything. And so I think, there's like a lot of internalized hate that this guy probably felt and probably tried to diminish other people in those communities he was a part of to elevate himself. And it's like there is a tragedy in that, and it does make you evil to do that. But yeah.
Well, I like this quote too because I think it's relevant for today's political climate. Because we're so increasingly polarized in this country. There's so many different factors that are influencing that polarization, obviously, but I think it's worsened. Like the divide has gotten worse over time, especially in recent years. Like I think ever since COVID, or even going back to 2016. Not to blame everything on the elections, but
I'd say it was even 2008, like the start of the Obama years, true. Is where I started to really. Also, okay, I say that's when I started to really see it. I was in fucking middle school then. That's when I was developing like a consciousness for the world around me. So maybe it's just a fucking coincidence. I don't know.
maybe, but like I think that the internet certainly hasn't helped. Keep people aligned. It's just made things worse, but I think today you see how people don't necessarily want to view or accept the other perspective or even try to understand it because they don't share that perspective. Like people just don't want to explore it or engage in it because they're like, you're just wrong, and that's just kind of the mentality I think on both sides to a certain degree. So I like that quote.
Yeah, and I agree. And it's like a lot of people, I think it speaks to a lack of the ability to like meet people where they are. Because I know a lot of more conservative or even just like center liberal people. And it's like, I think they're fucking wrong. And I'm pretty upfront about that. But also, like that specifically doesn't make them evil. I think it's just like, okay, you're misinformed, but you grew up in this environment. You're around this thing. These are the news sources you listen to. Okay, I kind of get why you've come to this conclusion. Let's try to find some common ground, and then we'll work on this thing. Well, I don't like to give ground when someone says something that I view as hateful, but I'll just be like, okay, let's work with me here. I know how you came to this conclusion. Let's like walk backwards a little bit because for the most part, I think people don't like. For the most part, I don't think people are as hateful as their rhetoric would always suggest. I think most people are just trying to get through the week.
I agree.
But back to Cohen, I think, because he's very interesting in this movie, and he sort of creates Donald Trump and has some like more complex feelings about that.
Yes, he definitely does. I know that you listened to the Behind the Bastard series on this, so maybe you have a little bit more insight to share there. But it is crazy to think like how it's like a ripple effect. Roy Cohen is there influencing Trump, and then Trump is there, and now he's influencing so much of our society. It's crazy to think how it was like 1 degree of separation. Roy Cohen has had so much influence.
Yeah, and it's like Trump the movie plays with this structurally too, because Cohen is not as present in the back half, which reflects reality, because as he started getting sick, and the movie puts this around the time of Trump's wedding, Roy Cohen got sick with HIV, and this was during the AIDS epidemic. We'll talk about later how he was also personal friends with Ronald Reagan, and Reagan didn't really seem to, change Reagan's perspective on the issue all that much. But Trump did distance himself from Cohen at this point, and the movie, I think, really paints it as well, I don't need you anymore. I've made it, and I'm here, and you really get a flip in their dynamic at this point. Donald no longer goes to Roy for help, and now Roy goes to Donald for help. And there was a point towards the end. Do you remember when Cohen calls Donald Trump at the beginning of the movie and Trump answers the phone? What does Cohen say to him? He says,
I do not remember.
He says, don't be a fucking loser or whatever. Don't answer your own phone. Get an assistant.
Yeah.
And then at the end, before Trump invites him down to Mar-a-Lago, he calls him, and what does Roy do? He answers his own phone.
Yeah.
Their dynamic has completely shifted throughout the story, and Cohen is totally at Trump's mercy, and sort of a hanger-on to his lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, in Roy, especially in that last few scenes of the movie, you can see that he has remorse, I think, for mentoring Trump. There's this scene at the end where he gets these fake diamond cufflinks from Trump, which is apparently a real thing that he's been doing for years, which I looked up. This is a documented thing. He gives these fake diamond cufflinks. He doesn't care. And there's this good quote from the writer of the film. He says, "If a brutal guy like Roy Cohn can feel betrayed by Trump, what does that say about Donald?" And I think that's incredibly powerful. But yeah, I think that's just, you can see how he's starting to just back away from Trump. But also he still needs him for certain things. But yeah, he's definitely remorseful.
But it's interesting too, because in a more just a straight up traditional story in this narrative, this structure, I think this would be painted as, the mentor has realized he's created a monster and he regrets his actions. But from what I've learned about Cohen over the last few days, I don't know if he really does. I think he regrets how he is being treated by Donald. I don't think he has any real reservations about what he and Donald did together. Yeah. But I do think this trajectory, both in real life and the story, just speaks to the difference between the two men. Because Roy Cohn indisputably was a complete monster. But from what I have heard, he was extremely loyal to the people around him, which is why people stuck with him. They all saw him as evil and a huge piece of shit, but he came through for them consistently. He was always in their corner, and he would get the job done. He was competent. Trump is loyal to no one, and he will drop you the second you're not useful to advancing his image. And we've seen that just in our era of his presidency. He's ditched so many people who were once in his inner circle, fucking Rudy Giuliani. He's gone.
Yeah, he doesn't talk to him anymore. he's out of the circle.
Apparently, Trump did say at one point during the 2020 attempt to steal the election, he was in a meeting and he screamed out in exasperation, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" Because Roy Cohn was good at his job. He was a very effective fixer. And I do want to talk about him a little bit, because between this and listening to Behind the Bastards over the last couple of days, it became very both apparent and devastating how big of an impact just Cohen had on American politics that reverberates all the way to today. As I mentioned, he was very heavily involved in the McCarthy hearings. He introduced Donald Trump to Roger Stone, and he introduced Trump to Rupert Murdoch, who would favorably write about Donald Trump and his business ventures in the New York Post that he owned, which was instrumental in getting Trump the cultural cachet that he would ride the wave of for decades. Murdoch would also go on to build Fox News. the
Mm-hmm.
most watched news network in America, and a fully fledged propaganda project for the conservative movement. Um, it's just wild. And also, as I alluded to earlier, Cohen was friends with Ronald Reagan. And
Wow.
after helping Reagan win the election via some rat fuckery, by having his like cohort all endorse a liberal third party candidate for the presidency, causing the Democratic candidate to
Mm.
lose. I believe it was Carter, maybe.
Yeah, it was Carter.
Yeah, he fell in very well with Ronald Reagan, and Cohen, who was a lawyer, was in a position to start suggesting judicial appointments that Reagan could make that
Mm.
were favorable to Roy Cohen and his clients. Um, so
Wow.
that's great.
What what a stand-up guy, you know. That
Yeah,
is nuts to think about. Um, I I have no words for this.
yeah.
This is insane. But one other thing that I did find out while I was doing research too, I don't know if they talked about in the Behind the Bastards, but
Mm-hmm.
apparently a lot of the men that Roy was
Mm-hmm.
attracted to were young, blonde, blue-eyed men who bore a
Mm-hmm.
striking resemblance to young Donald.
Yep.
So there is, it's possible. It's possible that Roy was kind of attracted to him when he first met
Mm-hmm.
him, and that's why he was like, "Come sit down and talk with us and hang out with me and spend some time with me." There's even, I think, like in that scene when he first sits down at that table with all those guys, I think very briefly they show like Roy putting his hand on like Donald's like thigh or something like that, really,
Mm.
really briefly. So there's like this
He also calls
implication
him the
there.
F slur as a joke,
Oh yeah,
but
that's right. Yeah, great comedic timing. But yeah, so is this film a love story? Who knows?
um, yeah, they do mention that in Behind the Bastards, and apparently a lot of people speculate that like at one point at least Roy Cohen may have been like in love with Donald Trump.
Mm,
I also, just as a side note, not related to this, but there's that interview. It's in the movie where she's like, "Oh, what would you do if you lost all your money?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'd run for president." And I saw that real interview just a couple days before we saw the movie, and yeah, the interview is pretty much word for word as far as I remember. But I do want to talk about Trump's view of deal making as an art,
mm,
and
mhm.
how funny I think this sentiment is, because he talks about it at the end of the movie like he's some fucking master of this like art form, but it speaks to his arrogance because so many of his deals were just facilitated by Cohen and others,
Mhm.
basically breaking laws for him and manipulating the tax code to get him what he wanted.
Yeah.
um and it's so like, I don't know, it's just so Trump to me. And the rules, the three
Those
rules.
stupid rules.
Rule number 1, attack, attack, attack. Rule number 2, admit nothing, deny everything. And rule number 3, always claim victory. And I don't know, but I think this explains a whole lot
Mhm. Yeah, it
about
does.
what we're dealing with right now. Um, and I think
Mhm.
ending the movie with him just regurgitating these, as he is discussing the development of the book, The Art of the Deal, is a great coming full circle, as he basically becomes fully formed by appropriating his mentor's 3 rules and taking credit for them himself. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Right.
just I think it's the perfect ending for this story of this relationship.
Oh yeah. It honestly is great. Yeah. He's just stealing something, repackaging it as his own, and
Mm-hmm.
then saying this is who I am. And God, it feels like the rules that you would hear on like a Joe Rogan podcast, or like it's like some snake oil pitch
Mm-hmm.
of just
Yeah.
like like alpha male bullshit. Just like, you cannot be anything but aggressive, and you can never say that you did something wrong. It's like, dude, no, that's like that. That feels so immature.
Yeah. The first rule, especially, is something like Gary Vaynerchuk would say. You know?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely he would.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right though. It is very much like it's all about your mindset. You've got to have the winner mindset. You've got to be a
Yeah.
shark. You've got
It's a shark economy. Or are you a shark or a sheep? What? Oh, brother.
Yeah. But I mean, the always claim victory is the one that sticks with me the most. Because what it's like, I just need to find 11,000 more votes. That's what I need.
Yep.
The perfect phone call. I admit nothing, deny everything. It's like, I don't know what they're talking about. It was a perfect phone call. Nobody's ever had a better phone call than that.
Yeah, exactly. I know nothing, but I know everything. I'm great with words.
I know words. I have the best words. I do actually, you know what? I am going to share some of Donald Trump's best words. Let me find it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way to close out the discussion of The Apprentice.
Just
and talk
on
about the big
hold
words
on, I
that
gotta
he knows.
God. Where is that fucking... There it is. This is my favorite thing Donald Trump has ever said. He said this on Truth Social a while back. I don't remember exactly what prompted it, but I think it's very funny considering who Trump's current hype man is, who Trump seems to share my resentment of this individual. But Trump, when Elon Musk came to the White House asking me for help on all of his many subsidized projects, whether it's electric cars that don't drive long enough, driverless cars that crash, or rocket ships to nowhere, without which subsidies he'd be worthless, and telling me how he was a big Trump fan and Republican, I could have said, drop to your knees and beg, and he would have done it.
Wow.
It is my favorite thing he's ever said, and it's the most truthful thing he's ever said.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I can totally see that happening.
And my Trump impression has fallen a long way from his first term, but I'm sure it will, return if I have to pay attention to him more again. Any final thoughts on The Apprentice, Niles?
No final thoughts. I've already said my piece on this movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly do believe, yeah, if you're a Republican, if you're a Democrat, if you're a third party, check out this movie. I know some of you definitely won't, but I think you'll learn some new things if you watch this movie.
Yeah, I think it's very well made, and it takes a more interesting look into this man that we're all very familiar with than I think people were initially giving the movie credit for as it was in development. I think it's very much worth watching. It gives great insight into Trump, Cohen, who is someone I did not know much about, and also just a lot of the foundation laying for the nonsense that is contemporary American politics. Like, so much of our country's politicking, I guess, is done by people like Donald Trump and Roy Cohen. And it's been that way for a very long time. I think during the Trump era, what used to be more subtle and behind the scenes has come into the light more, and more people are aware of it now because the people doing it are dumber. But I think gaining an understanding of that is very useful to all of us. But so yeah, I would recommend The Apprentice with the appropriate trigger warnings. There is a pretty graphic sexual assault scene in it. So just be warned. But yeah, good movie. Let's transition into some other stuff. Niles, what have you been watching?
Yeah, so lately, Great British Bake Off is back. Great British Baking Show. I love this show. It's so fun. It's a good season so far. Continuing on with that. And the other night, since we watched Alien Romulus, I went back and watched Prometheus. And I honestly love that movie.
I think it's cool.
I think it's so cool. It's like so original. It stands out on its own like 2 feet. It's not trying to be an alien movie. and recreate what Alien was. It's like, no,
Mm-hmm.
let's explore a little bit more and let's try and understand the origins. Yeah, it got a bad rap when it came out, and it's an underrated movie. But I still need to see Covenant, so that's next on the list for what I'm gonna watch. Um, and started a rewatch of Game of Thrones. Um, we'll see if we get through all the way to the last season, but I was just kind of craving it after we finished House of the Dragon, and just going back and watching that first season. It's like, this is so fucking good. This is such a good show, and I'm just like, I'm seeing new things as I'm watching it of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why this parallel with the last season, I'm seeing like why they made that decision. So I'm going to pick up some new things. I'll report back what I find.
All right.
And there's 2 shows that started Better Call Saul. Pretty cool show, actually. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I want to continue it. So I'm going to. Gonna keep watching it. It's really cool so far. And I never finished the X-Men 97 Marvel show, so I'm going back and finishing that. And oh man, I just got past the halfway point, and my boy Gambit. Oh, that was actually pretty emotional. I did, for not having seen the show for like several months and then coming back to that episode, I was like, oh man, I can't believe
it's a devastating episode. Yeah
I can't believe how hard that hit me. I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize I liked these characters so much. But that's it for me. What have you been up to?
I've been rewatching Arcane, the first season, as the second season comes out next month in November. Really excited to jump back into that show. I started the Agatha All Along Marvel show. I think I've only watched the first episode. It's fun. People seem to really like it though, so I'm going to keep watching it. I don't know. It's not really a show I asked for or needed.
Yeah,
so I'm just kind of, I don't know. And I'm not really like in a huge Marvel mood right now. Most of what's coming up on the horizon doesn't seem all that exciting to me. The only thing I'm really looking forward to is the Thunderbolts. And yeah,
me too.
I forget what other projects are even out there, but I don't know.
The other day, I like realized, oh yeah, Echo came out. And I didn't watch it. I was like, I thought that show was still coming out, like on the horizon. I was like, no, it has been released for some time.
For a while.
I just forgot about it.
Yeah, and I watched the first half of it, and like that's kind of where I am with Marvel. Like, it was fine. I just forgot about it because there's a lot of really good stuff that's coming out all the time, and it wasn't that good, so I forgot about it. I think I'll go back eventually, but
yeah, I'll watch it. I will.
I don't know. I'm kind of bummed that the MCU has gone in the direction it has, where it's like I said this in the Weekly Planet Facebook group, but like I feel like the big shift that happened with Marvel was, it used to be, to me at least, because there were always weaker films than others in the MCU, right? But it used to feel always greater than the sum of its parts. And I remember realizing pretty early on, I think around the time the first Avengers, like, oh, this is a TV show. This is a TV show, and the Avengers movies are the season finales. So I think that's why I was more patient with the individual weaker films than some other film fans might have been, because I'm like, oh, it's just every TV show's got weak episodes. That's fine. The next one will be good. And now I think it's the opposite, because there's a lot of stuff coming out in Marvel that I do really, really like. I liked the Marvels. I liked Loki. I liked Multiverse of Madness. I liked Hawkeye. But it just feels like the MCU is lesser than the sum of its parts now, because I don't know what the fuck is happening anymore. It's spiraling out of control, and it feels like every creative decision they're making is panicking and trying to just get back to playing it as safe as possible. They're like, oh, we got to bring back Robert Downey Jr. to play Doctor Doom, and we're going to rework Doctor Doom to have a relationship primarily with Spider-Man, not the Fantastic Four, because Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland played off of each other as Tony Stark and Peter Parker. And it's
man.
And like, this reeks of desperation. And
Yeah,
that doesn't make me very excited.
Let me just grasp at some straws real quick, see what we can get.
Yeah. I've got a movie. I don't have a movie. I have a video on my channel about what I think the main like issue is and how it could have been fixed if Secret Invasion was a movie and also good. I'll link that in the description. You can check it out. But back to the actual thing.
Stuff you're
I finished
watching, yeah.
Yeah, I finished Dune Messiah last night.
Nice.
Yes, I like it. I think it's a very interesting book. I am really, really curious to see how it functions as the capper of a film trilogy and what changes Denis Villeneuve makes to it. Because Dune Part 2, the film, is very epic and lots of action and adventure. And I think that is part of what made fans of the first book dislike Dune Messiah when they first read it, because that book is not that at all. Like, almost the entire thing takes place in Paul's palace, and it's lots of conversations in rooms, which I found very riveting and interesting. But I am very curious to see what happens with it.
Right on.
And I am interested to see, I think, like he did with Shani in Dune Part 2, he has said that he is going to amp up the roles of Uluran and Aaliyah, Paul's wife and sister, in that in Messiah. So I think I'm really excited to see what that becomes. Also, continuing on with Only Murders in the Building, I will probably watch this week's episode right after we've recorded, because
Nice.
I like this show. It's a fun, it's just a good TV show. Also, the Penguin. The Penguin fucking rules. It's so good.
I need to watch it. I need to start that.
You do, so we can do an episode on it. It's awesome. It is a very worthy continuation of the Batman. Everybody in it is great, and the story goes in directions that I was not necessarily anticipating. Love that. And as of this morning, I have started reading the comic book Saga.
Cool.
So far, I don't really know what it's about yet. I didn't have all that much time to read. So I will report back next time when I have a better idea of what the story is. But it's
right on.
The art is amazing so far. And I can, just vibes-wise, I can tell already it's something I will love. I've heard nothing but good things about this comic book series, so I'm very, very excited to read it. So.
Cool. I love that.
All right. And that's the show.
Yes.
We'll be back in 2 weeks for a very spooky Halloween episode. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, until then, Niles, where can people find you online?
You can follow me on Instagram at Niles Got No Styles. Dylan, what about you? Where can people follow you online?
You can follow me on Instagram at DylanD1026, on Twitter at DDay Movies, on YouTube at DDay Movies. You can find both of us here at Play Pause Rewind, both on YouTube and your podcast platform of choice. We also have a second YouTube channel called Play Pause Rewind Videos. I kind of want to do a rewind on Gladiator before Gladiator 2, but will that happen? I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
It would be fun, but we're both very busy people, and you can find us only on the internet. We're not going to tell you where we are in the real world. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching and listening. We really appreciate it. If you like this, please subscribe, share with your friends, leave us a 5-star review on, iTunes. Thanks.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.